Dr. German, could you give us your full name, please?
Lindsey German.
You've provided a second witness statement to the inquiry, which is dated the 6th of March 2024. Are the contents of that witness statement true and correct to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are.
You tell us that you were elected to the Central Committee of the Socialist Workers Party in 1979, and as I understand it, you remained a member of the Central Committee throughout the period which is material for our present purposes right through to the mid-90s and beyond.
That's right.
You tell us that your role on the Central Committee included setting day-to-day tasks. Could you give us a little bit of a flavour of what that means in practice?
Well, what it means is that we would have an annual conference and we would have regular national meetings, and we would decide what we thought priorities were, and then depending on what job you had, you would try to implement those perspectives. So, for example, when I was women's organiser, I might organise meetings, I edited the magazine, I encouraged branches to do certain things, we would have certain priorities that we wanted them to follow. It would be those kind of things. Later on, I edited the review magazine, so that was my main job at the time, but again it would involve travelling the country, talking to districts and branches and getting them to do certain things that we thought were appropriate to do, support for a demonstration, support for a strike, those kind of things.
And in terms of the organisation of demonstrations, what level of involvement did you have?
Well, that depended very, very much on the demonstration. Usually, the demonstrations weren't organised by the SWP. They were organised by various bodies, broader trade union bodies, or maybe groups of anti-fascists, for example, as was the case with Welling. So they would not just be organised by the SWP, they would be organised by a broad range of people. So that depended. It very often was the case. I would just be saying to people, can you book coaches to come on this demonstration? Or can you turn up at the demonstration?
I understand there'd be some demonstrations you'd organise and some which you would support. Am I right to understand that the Central Committee met quite regularly?
It met every week.
And would that mean that you would discuss a demonstration before and after it occurred?
That very much, again, depended on the size of the demonstration, the nature of the demonstration. Very often they were just things that we wouldn't discuss in any great detail. We would say there's a demonstration about a particular topic, we'd like people to support it, but we wouldn't go into any great detail about it.
Can I ask you, what was your, in general terms, we'll come to specifics later on, but in general terms, what was the level of your personal attendance at demonstrations and rallies that the party either organised or supported?
With national demonstrations, obviously I would be on quite a lot of them. Again, it varied, but yes, I would say I would be on quite a lot of the demonstrations that were taking place. With local ones, it was much less likely that I would be on one. But for example, in the early 1980s, the Labour Party organised a lot of demonstrations over unemployment. And I remember travelling to Liverpool, where there was a very, very big, a huge demonstration for a demonstration outside of London, which I was part of, but I was part of it as an ordinary member. I wasn't organising it. That was organised by the Labour Party.
Thank you. I'd like to move now to showing you some of the documents that were compiled about the Socialist Workers Party to explore whether or not they're accurate. I'd like to start with a document compiled by the Security Service, their Brief Guide to Subversion of 1985. So it's at tab C1, and for the projector it's 32553. This is the first page, Dr. German. Just to orientate ourselves, you will see it is the Brief Guide to Subversion in Great Britain. I can tell you it's a 1985 version, and this is the section about the Socialist Workers' Party. The bit I'd particularly like to ask you about first is on the second page at the top, the section entitled Ideology / Policies. The Socialist Workers' Party, SWP, is a Trotskyist organisation. See Trotskyism too. Its objective is, therefore, the overthrow of the capitalist system and its replacement by a form of government based on workers' councils protected by a workers' militia. If I just stop there, is that factually accurate?
Yes, in the sense that we always stood for the overthrow of the system, but we also saw it as something which we saw as a democratic process. So I would say this is rather a kind of, well, it is a very condensed sort of version of it, and its replacement by a form of government based on workers' councils. Yes, but that was something that we based very much on the idea that people would organise those from below, that they would be things that were based on workplaces, in communities and so on. Protected by workers' militia is a kind of, is a very condensed way of looking at it, that you might, you would say in those situations that we always feared, as was the case with many revolutions that did take place, that the threat of violence came from counter-revolution, and that therefore we would be prepared to defend ourselves, but it would be seen in that context. So, yeah, that would be my caveats to that particular description of it, I suppose.
Okay. If we carry on, and it's believed that a socialist revolution could not survive in one country in isolation, must, in consequence, be built internationally.
That's right, yes.
It is opposed to the use of terrorism and indiscriminate violence, but believes that violence may be necessary to achieve political aims and to consolidate any revolution achieved.
Well, I think the important phrase there is actually to consolidate any revolution achieved, because, again, we looked at the examples, for example, of Chile, where there was a democratically elected left government, which was overthrown by a very violent coup with 10,000 people dead in 1973. So I suppose that we would say that in that situation, you do need to defend yourself, as the Chilean government attempted to do, unfortunately, not successfully. So yes, again, to put it in that context, I think it's very important to put it in the context that it isn't, our whole tradition, our whole politics were not the idea of a kind of left-wing coup which would take over from the existing government. We believed that you could only achieve socialism, I still do believe this, you could only achieve socialism by an organic movement based on working class people organising themselves and therefore presenting an alternative to existing government.
Could we now move to the next page of the same document? Thank you. At the top, there are some membership figures which cover the first few years of the period we're interested in. Dr. German, this isn't a memory test, nor am I seeking absolute precision.
Good.
Are these figures in the right ballpark?
I guess so. I'm just thinking, I mean, I joined in 72. We had around 3,000 or 4,000 members then, so it says 2,350, but then it goes up to 3,500 in 74. 77, we definitely were bigger by then because there'd been the very big movements against the Tory government and then continued to a certain extent under Labour. I think it's true that in the early 80s we declined somewhat as a result of the general changes in politics overall, the rise of Thatcher, the defeat of the miners and so on. I'm a bit surprised by 85 because I thought that after the miners' strike we did actually recruit some people. I'm surprised it's lower in 85 than it was in 84. But I would suggest that these are fairly accurate figures, yeah.
Just settling on that 1977 figure of over 5,000, did the resurgence at that time of the far right in the form of the National Front have anything to do with growth in membership?
I think so. I think it would have been one of the main drivers of membership. People were extremely concerned about the rise of the National Front. It did very, very well in elections for a time. It was a real threat on the streets. So I think people will have felt they needed to get involved and get more committed to socialist politics, and I think that's what that reflected.
Thank you. The bottom of that page, it says activities. The party's main activities are A, the fostering of industrial disputes. Until 1982, it operated within trade unions through the rank and file movement, but members now take part in union activity and industrial disputes openly. So first of all, is it right that the SWP fostered industrial disputes?
Well, certainly we encouraged people who wanted to go on strike to do so, and in some cases you'll have a situation, I know from my own union branch, where people say, we'd like more pay, should we go on strike to get it, or is it impossible to do so? So there are those debates, and we would have been on the side of people wanting to go on strike. I don't think this is quite accurate, though, about I mean, maybe you're going to ask me about this, I don't know, about the rank and file movement wasn't open. It was a very open movement in a whole number of unions, so people knew about it. It was a way of gathering together people in a particular union to promote the most militant policy that we thought would be appropriate at the time.
You've saved me the question. Thank you very much. And we can take this document down now. And can we go to a similar document only many years later? This is the Security Service's Brief Guide to Subversion 1995, tab C3, sir, 36610. And if we go first of all to page 3, please. Just to look at the membership figures again, bringing the second half of the 80s and the first half of the 90s into play. Again, the question is, for that period after 1985, are the figures recorded there in the right ballpark?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think the 94 figure of 10,000, while it may have been claimed, is probably a bit higher than we actually had. But I would say we had several thousand members would be how I would describe it, yeah.
And would if the absolute numbers aren't quite right, would the broad trend that there was an escalation in membership in the early 1990s with a particular spike between 92 and 94, are the trends correct?
I'm not quite sure about that, to be honest. It seems to me you are saying it, or the figures are saying that it's nearly doubling in 2 years. I would have thought that's probably a bit more than it was. In other words, it may have gone from 6,000 to 7,000 or 8,000, which wouldn't be such a dramatic increase. That would be my guess on it.
Okay, and moving to the drivers for those, is one of the drivers the poll tax?
The poll tax definitely was a thing that did galvanise a very big movement, and a very big movement which people again looked towards socialist organisations to join. I mean, not just the SWP, other ones as well. So yeah, that would have been one of the things.
And would it be the resurgence of the far right, this time in the form of the British National Party?
Yes, that would have been a factor, although I think if you look at the period of the early 90s, people were very, very shocked that Labour didn't win the election in 92, and I think that therefore there were a whole number of issues that came up that you had this Tory government for the next 5 years. There was obviously the rise of the far right was a very serious concern that people had. There had been the poll tax, although they obviously had to abandon that. There was also things like the Criminal Justice Bill, which was very unpopular. So there was a range of different issues, I would say, around that time that led to it.
And would the collapse of the Eastern Bloc style of communism also have been included in the drivers?
Now, that's a very big question, and I'm not sure we benefited that much from recruitment over that. As I'm sure you're aware, the SWP actually was well known for being an organisation which never thought Russia was socialist. We described it as state capitalist. And one might have thought that around that time we might get the benefit of that, of being correct in that analysis. But actually, I think what happened was that one of the factors around the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc was that it led to a demoralisation among socialists who had illusions in it. And I think that tended to affect the whole left. So I'm not sure. I mean, we probably did recruit people out of it, but not in significant numbers, I wouldn't have said.
We may come back to that in a little bit more detail in a moment. But for the moment, I think we can move on from that page to the next page, to page 4, to touch upon something you have just mentioned. This is the activities paragraph of the brief guide, and I'm interested in drawing your attention, Dr. German, to subparagraph D. The party's main activities are, and D is, campaigning on social and political issues such as the Community Charge and more recently the Criminal Justice Act. The party has been among the leading opponents of the Act through its representation on the CACJA, although it has not been involved in the violence that has accompanied some of the demonstrations against the Act. So first of all, is it right that that was one of the SWP's main activities at this time?
Yes, and I was one of the people on the main body of the CACJA. So yes, I was quite involved in that campaign, and we did see it as very important. We saw it as an attack on civil liberties and something that we thought was important to oppose.
And the way that the SWP mobilised on that issue, is it right that that did not involve violence?
That's right. We organised a mass demonstration, which unfortunately did end in violence because of the policing of the demonstration, which was I felt was very, very severe. But certainly our intention was a mass peaceful demonstration.
Could we take that document down now, please, and go to 31619? So this is not in the bundle. This is a 1991 document, and it's about your amended constitution that I want to ask. So this is a report submitting a post-conference bulletin in 1991 with the amended constitution. If we could go to the next page, please. On the left-hand column on the first page, the paragraph numbered 1. And I'm interested, I'll read it all out for those who are following online. The Socialist Workers Party is an organisation of revolutionary socialists dedicated to the overthrow of capitalism internationally and the construction of a world socialist system. The SWP stands in and develops the revolutionary communist tradition of Marx, Lenin and Trotsky, as opposed to the social democratic and Stalinist traditions. Just stopping there, that's the distinction you were adverting to a moment ago, isn't it?
That's right.
With the state capitalists.
That's right.
Standing as it does in this tradition, the SWP believes that the working class is the only force capable of building socialism in the world. Therefore, it strives to construct a revolutionary party composed in its overwhelming majority of workers. The SWP is democratic centralists because the Revolutionary Party must be a disciplined, activist, combat organisation. It is democratic in reaching its decisions and centralist in carrying them out. Stopping there, combat organisation. What does that mean?
What it means is that it's a fairly common term that's used about organisations of these sorts, and what it means is that we want to be an organisation which is fighting alongside the working class in order to challenge many of the assumptions of government, of employers, of all those things. It doesn't mean, when it says combat organisation, it doesn't mean a military organisation. It means in the sense, perhaps if you talked about combating, you talk about combating ideas, or you talk about combating a particular agenda by an employer, for example, it's meant in that sense. So it's meant as an organisation which is centred on working class organisation, which is centred in the trade unions and argues for the kind of path that we think is going to be successful. That's what it means. It doesn't mean we have a military wing or anything like that, because that was very far from our aim.
Thank you. If we could take that down now, please. What I would like to understand is a little bit about the SWP's conception of the police in a capitalist society. As I understand it, central premise is as a ruling class exploiting the working class. The SWP wants to build a movement to overthrow the ruling class and replace it with the sort of government that we saw in the synopsis. Is it the view of the SWP that the role of the police in a capitalist society is essentially to keep the ruling class in power?
The view of the SWP is that there exists what we sometimes call a state machine, which includes the police, which includes the army, which includes a whole range of bodies which are there in order to ensure that the people who already rule do continue to rule, and that the police, in that sense, are seen as people who act in the interests of the ruling class at any one time. And I would argue that that is correct. I think if you look at the role of the police in a whole number of the disputes that perhaps we're going to come on to talk about, you can see that it's very, very clearly it is in order to weaken trade union organisation, to weaken the effect of industrial action. We saw this in the miners' strike, we saw it in Wapping. And so that would be our view of it, yes.
And as you would see it, they will act violently if necessary to secure their aim.
Well, I think, to be perfectly frank, that is incontrovertible. I think that we've seen this time and time again, and we have hearings and we have inquiries going on into issues like Orgreave and Hillsborough and some of these things, and I think we've seen that the police can act violently and do act violently, and on certain occasions. Now, this isn't true about every policeman you meet on the street or even on demonstrations. I mean, I organise a number of demonstrations where we liaise with the police in a perfectly open and, I think, a perfectly reasonable manner, and I think they would say that. But we know that at times that isn't the case, and we know that on those occasions the police do act violently.
And I think, is it a fair summary of your witness statement? You develop in some detail a trend after Margaret Thatcher comes into power of the police changing and becoming harder in the way that they police disputes such as the miners' strike, Wapping, Warrington, and so forth.
Yes, I think that if you look at the police under Thatcher, there's certainly no question that again, this isn't just the view of the SWP. I think that any academic study will show you that the police do increase the level of combativity, the level of violence, the use of riot police, the use of all these things. I think that is simply the way that it developed, and I think Thatcher was determined to destroy the miners, and she made sure that the police were very, very well equipped for doing this sort of thing, and she succeeded in doing this. She succeeded the police were definitely politically involved in the whole Wapping dispute. I think, again, if you look at the evidence of the closeness between Rupert Murdoch and Margaret Thatcher, I don't think that isn't a matter of question, really. It is a matter of fact, I think. So yes, I think it definitely accelerated under Margaret Thatcher.
And what was, in broad terms, the SWP's response to the hardening of policing during the 1980s?
Well, in broad terms, we very much opposed it. We very much opposed the kind of policing that we saw at places like Orgreave. We thought that this was a very politically motivated thing, which was designed to weaken not just the left, but the whole of working class organisation, the whole of the trade unions. That was the purpose, I think, of this kind of policing. At the same time, and again, if you look at the example of the miners' strike, we argued very much against individual solutions to this kind of violence. We argued for a collective thing. I mean, I don't know if you recall, but there was a terrible case where people dropped, I don't know what it was, a brick or something, which on a taxi taking a miner to work when the strike was still going on. And we regarded this as individual action, which was simply, it was both wrong and counterproductive, and we were very much opposed to that sort of thing. But at the same time, we did think that the way in which the policing went in the 80s was remarkably increase in the level of policing and in the level of violence of policing.
Moving to the Cold War, whilst the Cold War was still happening, did the SWP have a public position on the stance it would take in the event that the Cold War went hot?
Well, we opposed the idea of nuclear war. We opposed the idea that there could be destruction between ourselves and Russia and so on. Sorry, am I not?
No,
I'm not answering.
My question isn't clear enough. If you could strip away the possibility of a nuclear apocalypse, if a conventional war had broken out in Europe between the Warsaw Pact and NATO, did the SWP have a position on that?
Well, we would be opposed to both sides in the war. We wouldn't have been in favour of... we wouldn't have supported Russia, but we would have also said, I think, that the arming, the increase in nuclear weapons, the increase in conventional weapons, actually contributed to the possibility of war. We were arguing all the time for an end to this kind of militarism. That was one of our main features. We didn't, I guess we never explicitly said, if there was a war between the Warsaw Pact and NATO, we would support the Warsaw Pact, or we wouldn't support the Warsaw Pact. I guess that was something that we just took the line. We were against wars on both sides, and we saw both sides as major imperial powers, which, you know, you're saying don't mention nuclear war, but actually any conventional war involving both those sides would have rapidly headed towards some form of nuclear war, which is what the cruise missiles were all about. They were the idea you could have a kind of tactical, contained nuclear war in Europe, and we regarded that as just simply not the case.
Did it remain the case during the years we're now talking about, so in the 1980s and the first half of the 90s, that the SWP had no foreign nation state backing it?
No, never. We've never had any foreign nation state backing us.
And did it remain the case during this period that there was no Trotskyist government in the world?
Unfortunately not. Partly because, as we've already referred to, we didn't think you could have socialism in one country.
You need a global revolution.
That's right, yeah.
Can I move now to some of the reporting on the Central Committee? If we could have up, please, a document which you will find, sir, at B24, 19923. This is a an SDS report dated the 24th of March 1992, and it comprises a list of leading personalities in the SWP with some description of each. Now, the ones that I want to ask you about are, first of all, on this page, the description of Chris Bambury under the heading Central Committee Members. It's right, isn't it, that Mr. Bambury was a Central Committee member?
Yes, that's right.
It describes him, and this is a report by the officer we know as HN90, an aggressive individual with a mercurial temperament. He is regularly present at demonstrations and other public order events in the London area for the purpose of directing and controlling the SWP contingent. Long of all, in your how much experience did you have of Mr. Bambury?
Oh, a great deal.
And how long had, just in years term, how much had you known him?
I've known him since 1981, I think. Yeah.
Was he an aggressive individual?
Not at all. No, in my opinion, I'd say the opposite. I'd say he wasn't an aggressive individual.
Did he ever have moments of aggression?
Not that I would recall, no.
Were there any subjects that might elicit aggression from him, for example, particularly emotive issues?
Well, he was a Celtic supporter, football supporter, so he got emotive about that, I guess. And he, like all of us as socialists, there were things that made us very upset and at times made us angry.
The far right?
Of course, but that doesn't mean you're aggressive, does it? It means that you are annoyed about something, which is rather a different...
Yeah, indeed it is.
Characteristic.
And I'm asking, did, for example, the activities of the far right prompt aggression from him?
No, I mean, he was on demonstrations and he would be opposed to the far right, and that was absolutely clear, and that would have been true of hundreds or even thousands of SWP members, but I don't regard him as particularly aggressive.
Did he have a mercurial temperament?
I wouldn't have described it as such, no.
Was he regularly present at demonstrations?
Yes, that's true, yeah.
And when he was, did his position mean that he did direct and control the SWP contingent?
Well, that would have depended on the demonstration. Sometimes he would have done and sometimes he wouldn't. And we had stewards on the demonstrations. He would have been a steward. Sometimes he might have been the main steward. Other times there would be other people doing that. So if he was in that role, then yes, he would have done.
How would you describe Mr. Bambury's temperament?
Well, I would say, I mean, he's a flamboyant person. He's quite an extroverted person, but I would say actually he's a very kind person at lots of levels. That's as I know him, and I know him quite well. I would say that would be how I would describe him. Now, you know, I think we have to be very careful about these kind of, you know, these sketches of people which, you know, talk in these terms. I mean, what is that based on? Is it based on seeing somebody who's shouting slogans at a demonstration, or is it based on any real knowledge? And I would suspect it's based on the former, if anything, rather than any real understanding of him.
If we could move to the next page, please, and the second paragraph down, which is the pen picture of you. It says, the editor of the Socialist Worker Review and a regular contributor to the various publications of the SWP privacy, she is regularly seen at public order events, but seems to adopt the role of an observer rather than an organiser of the SWP tactics.
Well, I'd say that isn't very accurate either, because, I mean, it's may well be true on a whole number of demonstrations, but I did, along with other members of the Central Committee and with other SWP members, we did discuss tactics, both on the demonstrations sometimes, and also sometimes we discussed these things in advance, and we would discuss certain things. So yes, I played that role. So I think, again, this is slightly, if you don't mind me saying, it's a slightly kind of, superficial view of what I was doing.
If we could move to the next page, please, and the paragraph about Pat Stack. I'm interested in particular towards the end. It says, he sometimes acts as a media spokesman for the SWP and has always refused to condemn acts of disorder at major events. Did he sometimes act as a media spokesman for the SWP?
I think what this is referring to is that after the poll tax demonstration, Pat, as it says here, had or has major disability and wasn't on the demonstration himself. So he acted as the spokesperson for the SWP. I remember that well on the day, and I think in subsequent days. And he put forward the case, which I think was absolutely right for him to do so, that he wasn't going to condemn the acts of that took place on that day, acts of disorder as it's called here, that he saw this poll tax demonstration as very much a demonstration which started as a peaceful demonstration and was attacked by the police. So that he did refuse to condemn those acts of disorder, but I very much agreed with him about that, because I think when you look at what happened on the poll tax demonstration, it was very clear that that is what happened. I mean, we may well be coming on to talk about this at a later point, and perhaps we can go into it more, but there is no doubt in my mind that the use of vans, the use of police horses, and the way in which the police reacted. I mean, I knew one person whose leg was broken in the course of that demonstration. So I think he was right to do so, and I think he was right to say there was a huge amount of discontent and anger over the poll tax, and that should have been taken into account, rather than the police just attacking the demonstration. As far as I know, that was the main point at which he acted as a media spokesman, but I couldn't say that categorically. But I think that's the one that's probably being referred to here.
It does say always refused, which suggests more than one incident.
Okay, well, as I say, I can't comment on what the other ones might have been, but it would probably have been for similar reasons, and I would have supported him in doing this. I think this is partly that we need to look at some of these acts, not just simply in terms of what the end result is, but how they get to the situation that they get to, and I think that would be helpful when we're discussing them.
Okay, thank you. And if we could go now to the paragraph below, Julie Watterson, thank you. An aggressive individual who attends most public order events within the London area. At such events, she invariably takes control of the SWP contingent and is capable of organising disruptive action. She has recently been to the forefront at anti-racist demonstrations where she has taken control of the SWP and anti-Nazi League supporters, and has antagonised the leadership of the Anti-Racist Alliance with her disruptive tactics. How well did you know Julie Watterson?
I knew her well. I knew Julie very well. Yeah, we were friends for many years, and she unfortunately died of cancer when she was quite young, about 10, 12 years ago, something like that. I mean, again, I really do dispute this this description of her, really. She was a very gregarious person. Like Chris Banbury, she was Scottish, and they both had quite strong Scottish accents, and she spoke forcefully. She did speak forcefully, but she was not an aggressive person at all. She was even shorter than I am. She was very short. She was somebody who was a very able organiser, and she did involve herself in a whole number of demonstrations and other activities. But I just think this description is completely inaccurate when you want to. And I think if you asked anybody who knew Julie, would the first thing that you say about her that she's an aggressive individual, they would not. And of course, she also did suffer quite a severe injury at the Welling demonstration, for which she did gain compensation from the police some years later. So I think, no, I don't really accept this. And when you talk about she's antagonised the leadership of the Anti-Racist Alliance with her disruptive tactics, well, actually, there was a political difference between her and us and the Anti-Racist Alliance, which was about how you combat fascism. So I think that's no doubt why, if they were antagonised, that's why they would have been antagonised rather than for any other reason.
If I just stop there and ask one specific question. Julie Waterson receiving compensation from the police, is that something that you know about firsthand from her?
It's something that's a matter of record, I think, that she received it as a result of the injury that she got some years later, but in about 2000, I think. But I can find the
essentially,
reference.
my question is, how do you know?
Because it's in the public record. I'll find it for you if that's helpful for the inquiry.
I think it might be. Thank you.
It would be. Okay, thanks.
And secondly, is it right that as a member of the Central Committee, Julie Waterson did have a prominent role at anti-racist demonstrations?
Yes, that is true. That's absolutely true. And she was the person who was central to the Anti-Nazi League when it was re-established in the early 90s.
And what was her working relationship with Mr. Banbury?
It was pretty okay, I think. They were both on the Central Committee. They did, as I've seen it reported in one of the statements, they were saying they were arguing at some sort of demonstration as to whether they should stop at the bookshop, I think it was, or carry on. And I can well believe that, because they were both, they were both that type of character who would be saying, no, I want to do this, and no, let's do this. But they got on, they were friendly, they got on all right, and they worked together over a whole range of things.
Right. So I'm sensing they're both strong personalities who might sometimes have differed, but sometimes not.
Yes, that's right, exactly, and that they both had, as I say, they were both very good speakers, and they were both had strong Scottish accents and all that. I don't know whether that means very much to you, but people thought that they were kind of quite, I don't know, the Scottish sort of thing was always a bit colourful, if you like, with both of them.
I see. Thank you. Right at the bottom of the page, Wayman Bennett. A volatile and autocratic individual who does not tolerate any criticism. He is not particularly intelligent. His aggressive nature has enabled him to progress up the party ladder. He is seen at most order events in London. How does that chime with your knowledge?
Well, I have
Bennett?
to say, I mean, Wayman is, as I don't know whether you know, but is black, and I think in particular he's not particularly intelligent. He's an intelligent guy, and he's been to university, he's done all this sort of thing. So I don't really think the tone of that is particularly good. Again, volatile, autocratic, doesn't tolerate any criticism, aggressive nature. I mean, these are kind of like, they're such poor descriptions of people, really. They're so lacking any kind of nuance or any sort of, I find it hard to really know how to respond to this particular one, because I don't think, if by aggressive nature it's meant that maybe people shout slogans on demonstrations or make militant speeches, as he would have done and would do today, then okay. But if that speaks to a whole aggressive nature, then I would say again, no, I don't recognise that.
How would you describe Mr. Bennett?
Well, I would describe him as somebody who actually has been campaigning over racism for many, many years. That's quite a tough thing to do when you're a black person. I would say he does tolerate criticism.